My name is Ben, by the way. For POIs, just turn on your camera, raise your hand. The perversive culture of detachment that government shamefully supports in this debate is one that supports a culture where your friends are unwilling to help you move, for example, in your apartments, where your family is unwilling to listen to your problems because they feel as if their problems are more important, that it is okay for them to check out in times that you need them the most. It is in the world in which, in government, where you sever important relationships that are important for you to sustain life and to maintain the social connections that you have. The first line of response I'd like to make against Kara is her idea of how we get on ideas of love and references, because their main idea is the pivot happened because our notions of love are ones that are way too idealistic. I want to say that this is blatantly just untrue, and I know this is untrue precisely because the way we see love in real world isn't likely to be idealistic. You see your parents quarreling, for example, in the middle of the night because your dad forgot to do something. You see your friends go through their breakups because their boyfriends were so trash. You see your friends falling out because they're essentially bad people. Or you see stories like Marriage Story, for example, where you go through an ugly divorce, so it's unlikely this is going to be a rose-colored glasses. People are aware of the things that are ugly in relationships. But the second line of response I'd like to make against this, because their idea is that people are just going to be irrational. This is once again untrue. I posit that even in our world, people have a semblance of rationality in the way that they choose relationships, precisely because they're looking for the partner that is actually right for them. They see, for example, if your boyfriend opens your door for you. They see, for example, if your boyfriend, for example, cares for your hobbies just as much as you do. It's unlikely that you're going to just completely attach yourself just because someone has like six-pack abs, for example, or like, I don't know, speaks in a deep voice. The third is, this doesn't mean that we should check ourselves out of the relationship. This is a complete problem solution mismatch that comes against government. Just because you're irrational in the way you perceive love doesn't mean that the solution for you to stop caring about love altogether. I say that love is beautiful and it's good to care about it. But third is that lastly, it is on their world where it's much worse. Because if you're in an objectively bad relationship and you detach yourself from that relationship, why are you staying there? Like, at least in our world, right? If you care about it, if you express the fact that you get hurt, it is on our world where you're likely to take the necessary steps to move yourself out of that relationship, break up with that ugly boyfriend, for example, because they're a bad person who doesn't take a bath. The next part of his rebuttal is to talk about getting hurt, because they're allergic to the fact of getting hurt, right? They say that it's bad to get hurt. But the first is, why are you so afraid of getting hurt? I say that getting hurt is an important process in which you discover yourself and discover your preferences, because you don't know what ticks you off. You don't know what you dislike to an individual. Is it because they don't shampoo, for example? Is it because they don't take a bath? These are things that you only find out in the process of getting hurt and finding bad experiences in other individuals. But if you get hurt on both sides of the debate, we say it's good, because on our world, at least you have friends who care about you. On their world, it is where they're emboldened to check themselves out, because they say that your problems and your relationship problems are overburdening, and it, for example, ruins our vacation or something, right? That is the kind of culture that exists on their world, where you lose social support precisely because your friends think it's okay to not care about you. Yes, Alex.
So this is just not the status quo, right? People will treat you good because relationships are important to them. The difference is how fast and how hard you get attached to people.
No, right? This motion is about you thinking it's okay for you to not give yourself the 100%, to not fully care about your partner, to not care about your friends, because you perceive that it's okay to not invest yourself in the relationships that you do. That's what this motion is about. The next thing I want to talk about is what the pivot looks like, because I think aside from the fact that showing it's okay, it's also social affirmation to the idea of detachment as a valid strategy for coping in a relationship. Bad boyfriend, just stop caring. Your boyfriend shouted at you, just don't listen and just put yourself up behind a brick wall, for example, so that you don't get hurt. These are reinforced with things like advice from friends, media, for example, TikTok, and like therapy advice, it being, important. But I want to note why this is especially important, because if you have a culture that supports the pivot of detachment in relationship, it is when people are massively going to resort to detachment as a first level strategy when approaching the relationships. So it is on their world where you go in with a red flag because it's okay. You go in a relationship with a bad boyfriend because you can check yourself out anyway. You can detach yourself from that boyfriend. Versus on our world, where you're likely to think about how you're likely to feel in the long term. Because of four things. One, as humans, we're inherently non-confrontational, but we don't want to deal with the fact that we ourselves, for example, probably have something wrong, and especially true in conflicts. But you also just want to focus on you and your ability to regulate yourself and not care about the relationship. We think that is what is likely to happen on their world. I want to then run into my argument, and this is important. This argument is the pivot towards the detachment has contributed to the degradation of important relationships in people's lives. Note that at this stage of the speech, I've already shown why on their world, they're likely to be more resilient and stay in bad relationships. At least on our world, you get a better assessment of who you actually care about, have the fights that are necessary, have the disagreements that can actually improve your relationship. The first premise of this argument is that detachment calls for you to sever close ties with someone. This looks like what they said, to stop caring, to not invest, to not move, and not to go on a date with your partner because you're busy. There are four things here. The first is that in these kinds of relationships, you simply stop caring and you show the fact that you do not care about what they want. You do not care about how they feel in an argument. But the next is that you don't hear them out because you're detached. You don't listen, for example, to what their hobbies are, to what ticks them off, what is something like discomforting to them. But third and fourth, as you build resentment and you foster misunderstanding and build resentment, for example, for these kinds of relationships. In times of conflict, on their world, it's harder for you to resolve the issue due to the lack of care and the lack of the common ground that you have between partners. So the foundation of the relationship that's built on gov is one that is already shaky. It's unlikely to last. The second premise of this argument is that detachment snowballs to less contact and falling out in the worst case. Why? Because in times of conflict, it is when you're likely to stop talking to them because you think that they have nothing good to say. It is where on their world, you bury the issues in order for you to have amicable relationships with them because you're cool, because you're detached, because you're nonchalant and don't give a shit about things. But third, it is on their world where it calls for you to swallow, because in their world, if you want to fix these kinds of relationship, if you want to stay in the long term, it is when you have to swallow your pride, to swallow your ego, to ruin the machinations in your mind, the enemy that you've built out of these individuals, where you want to talk to them. That is why, for example, when you decide to stop talking to someone, it is much more difficult to start talking to them because it's an active choice that you have to make. So it's on their world where worse relationships are created, where you don't resolve conflicts, where you don't know who you are. What then is the solvency on side opposition? One, is you're compelled to listen to your partner, to know what they want, to discover their likes and dislikes. But more importantly, you might fight, right? You might have disagreements, but we say that fighting and getting hurt is good because there's still mutual love and understanding. And that is in fighting where you resolve your disagreements, where you find out who you are, where you find out what you truly need. Very, very proud to oppose.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that speech and now invite Deputy Prime Minister to begin theirs.
Starting in three, POIs be a voice. Starting in 3, 2, 1. For too long, there has been a standard upheld in media, in literature, in conversations with your friends and family and your partners of what relationships ought to be. We are told that these are people that you should turn to when you're feeling down, when you need something physically, financially, and emotionally. The problem is that you can never know whether or not these relationships will last. Maybe these individuals or relationships are neglectful of your needs, they're dismissive of your dreams, or maybe you're just not compatible with the lifestyle that you want moving forward. So you shouldn't give yourself 100% to a partner because the majority of people that you're going to date in your life are not the one for you. What is assured on government is that people, after relationships fall apart, that individuals are better able to pick themselves up and reevaluate what they want, what they need, and who they ought to spend their time with. The first thing I'm going to clarify in this debate is who are the people that are likely to be most affected by this pivot. What we explained from Kara is that this pivot was not born out of a vacuum because there are other societal narratives that make it so that absent the narrative of detachment, it's likely that the perspectives surrounding relationships are going to go to extremes. One, because media sensationalizes relationships. Don't believe Ben when he tells you that just because you see your parents fighting or you watch Marriage Story, you're not going to dream of a white wedding with a perfect husband when you grow up. Like a lot of the times, these people, they see their parents fighting and they still think that, though, oh, that's the ideal relationship. I want to get into a relationship right away so that I can find a husband and find my one true love. But secondly, it's the fact that individuals in relationships are often irrational. Ben says this is untrue because people are looking for the right person that is right for you. But this doesn't engage with the nuance that we explain, that maybe your boyfriend does open doors for you, but maybe he's also neglectful when you talk about your problems. And that's bad because you only see the fact that he gives you roses and he opens your doors. And that is exactly what makes people so irrational. The fact that they love this person so much that they're able to ignore and reject all of the red flags coming from that person. And what this suggests is that previously and absent the pivot, that only certain people were able to detach from relationships. Men that are able to entertain multiple women because of the fact that it's more socially acceptable for them to do so. Partners that earn more, that think that because they're earning more and contributing more to the relationship, that they're not obligated to give you anything else except for financial support. What this pivot does specifically is democratize detachment on two fronts. One, because internally you're able to self-validate outside of relationships. That's important because not all relationships are going to stay. But second is that externally, people feel as if it's more acceptable to leave relationships, more acceptable to not give 100% of yourself to someone that might not even be the one in the first place. We think that that's important. The second thing I'm going to do is just weigh the government case on three different frames, and this is where I integrate my responses to opposition. The first is on people that stay in relationships. What we explained from Kara is that these are people that are more likely to talk about their problems with one another because you do not see them through rose-colored glasses. Yes, your boyfriend might open doors from you, but also he might have yelled at you during your fight, and that's bad. Like, if you think that that's bad, you're allowed to talk about it, and you're allowed to realize that that is something that you are not okay with because you're not so attached to this person that you can't see that that's something that you're not okay with. They say that you build resentment on our side, but that's not true because resentment happens when you are so attached to these people. You rely on these people so much that at the point at which they don't reciprocate that attachment and that reliance, you feel mad. You feel mad because why are you giving so much of yourself to a person that doesn't do the same? That is when resentment happens. When you're detached, you're able to see these relationships more rationally. You're able to humanize the people that you're in relationships with. And that is what forms better relationships on our side. Before I get on to the even ifs, I go.
If people still fall in love on your side, how will they be rational? At best, they can distance, but they still feel the acceleration that comes from seeing their crush. Why will they be rational? At best, you just isolate yourself. There's no explanation why.
So one, you will not isolate yourself. People fall in love. People want to fall in love. But secondly, like, okay, maybe people are still irrational on our side, but that's a lot worse on your side when they're not detached. Like, if you concede that people are irrational because they're attached to people, then clearly you also concede to our frame that if they are detached, they will be more rational. So the debate is about extent. The second thing I want to note is that even if people choose to leave more on our side, that's good because one, it's easier to see that you should leave a bad relationship. If you do choose to leave a bad relationship, it's probably because the relationship was not good for you. Like, maybe their partner is not abusive, but maybe they're neglectful. Maybe you're not compatible. And that's important because you can always fall in love again, but you can never take away or take back the regret that you feel, the time that you feel was lost in a relationship that was not good for you, that you could have used looking for partners that were actually compatible and actually right. And that is what you lose on opposition side, assuredly. But secondly, it's easier to leave in the first place when you feel as if society will not shame you for leaving. The fact is, if you feel internally that you are validated because you do not attach your self-worth to this person. And I'm going to take this a step further. It's not just about whether or not people leave. It's the fact that after the relationship has ended, you're able to reevaluate the relationship more rationally without the yearning of how much you miss them. The rose-colored glasses that tell you that, oh my God, I'm never gonna get another boyfriend or girlfriend that's going to open doors for me and give me flowers on my birthday. Like, you're able to see this relationship as for what it actually was. That's good because when you find your next boyfriend, your next girlfriend, your next partner, you're able to see what you actually want. You're able to set emotional and physical boundaries, what you're okay with because of the fact that you evaluated the relationships that you've had before. But lastly, for people that do not choose to opt into relationships at all, we would suggest that this detachment is good because people do not feel the need to opt into relationships that they do not want or need at that point in your life. Like guys, some people are just happy with being single. The problem is that they're being pressured to get into relationships. They're getting pressured to being attached to people because of the fact that it's not okay for them to be single. People say that it's like, oh my god, you're so sad because you're single. Like, some people just want to be single, and that's okay because one, it's good for them because they're able to develop more as human beings individually before they get onto a relationship. But two, if people are able to evaluate whether or not they're actually like whether or not they actually want or need a relationship, that is how you get better partners in the dating pool, because of the fact that the people that are willing to date and looking for a partner are people that actually want one and are willing to spend, for example, time and effort into being a good partner. So it's okay if people do not choose to opt into relationships, or if they choose to opt into relationships less on our side, because it means that the people opting into relationships are people that actually want them. That is how you get better relationships as well. For all those reasons, propose things.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to invite Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Hello. I'll take the your voice. I'll start the speech in 3, 2, 1, go. A lot of the claims that comes from government assert that there is an over-attraction narrative that exists in status quo, where media forces you to over-attach yourself to your partner and to the relationships that you form. This is just a blatant lie, and in fact does not engage with the reality that exists in status quo. What we suggest is that often, if it's about the media, there are competing incentives for a lot of producers to show what it means to healthily attach yourself towards the relationships that you create. They show, for example, the destruction even of super attached relationships, etc., etc. And therefore, it is just unclear to what degree will people actually over-attach themselves to their partner to the degree that it also creates any forms of self-destruction. In fact, if you don't believe the thing about media, we suggest independent reasons as to why people do not just overly attach the moment that they do fall in love. For example, it is precisely because they also hear stories from their friends of failed relationships. They understand, for example, how difficult it is to like suddenly just fall in love with a stranger that you did not know for how many years of your life. It's likely that people proceed with caution, even if they are careful, even out absent the pivot. What all of this suggests, right, is that it is just unclear to what degree is this pivot actually necessary in order to remove the attachment that people feel among the irrational attachment that people feel among their relationships, when in fact there are already existing competing narratives and independent reasons from yourself that also reinforce that you should not overly attach the moment that you just fall in love, precisely because this is a stranger. It is just unclear why his handsome face will make you fall in love for that person. The second thing that I'd like to talk about is it's to talk about this weird claim that they suggest about how detachment is based off of rationality, and people will likely rationalize themselves and like see rose-colored glasses or like whatnot. The first thing here is that this is just not true. Detachment and what we suggest is likely based towards fear, precisely because a lot of the narratives that we consume show, for example, how relationships fail, how the fact, for example, that when you over-attach, it's likely that you are going to be abused, etc., etc. This is not any rational decision. What happens on their side is you are afraid to commit to relationships. You're afraid to talk to your partners. You're afraid to know that to know the kinds of experiences that your partner have. You're afraid to share. And therefore, if it's true on their side that people will still commit relationship, I want you to vibe check the kinds of relationship that is created on their side. It is people and partners not talking about their day. It is them not talking about their trauma. It is them not talking about conflict within their own relationship. It is them burying the deepest issues that they are feeling within their relationship precisely because of this fear of detachment. At the end of that, if it's true coming from second that relationships are important to people, then it does not benefit any people on their side within that comparative, precisely because relationships become meaningless the point in time that any and that people do not get any like impact from it the moment that they detach themselves from the creation of that relationship. And therefore, to no degree do they get anything about learning, about you evaluating yourself with the moment that you break up, precisely because there is nothing to learn the moment that you don't even actively share. There is nothing to learn the moment that there is nothing that you gain from that relationship, precisely because you were too afraid, precisely because you detach yourself from the occurrence of that relationship. What we suggest coming from Ben, to which they never respond to, is that the manifestation of detachment does not just impact the creation of relationships, but the more important change towards this debate is the existing relationships that people have right now. It is with their parents, it is with their friends, it is with the existing forms of relationships that they have within their own circle. What we suggest with the pivot is that it's likely that people consume this as the first step every time that they deal with conflict, every time that they deal with disagreements within that relationships. We think that this is worse precisely because of the things that comes from Ben, that you allow these people to build their pride and ego, to build their resentment the moment that they have to detach, the moment that you guys fight, precisely because of fear that probably you attach yourself too much, and that's why you are fighting. What happens then on their side is that a lot of this anger, hate, and misunderstanding solidifies by the affirmation of that pivot. It doesn't fizzle out, and in fact manifests as like sama ng loob. And it's unclear, therefore, why you get any semblance of communication, any semblance of accountability, any semblance of any resolution within those types of relationships, precisely because you do not precisely because you immediately detach yourself on their side. If it's true that some relationships have conflict by independent reasons that probably is like stems out from the various experiences of individuals, we create better relationships on our side because we do not actively detach the moment that conflict comes out. On our side, we are able to arbitrate it better precisely because we allow the space we allow the space for these individuals to communicate. At the worst instances that people do fight and perhaps not detach the moment that they fight each other, it is true that people are going to feel the heights of emotion, such as anger, such as resentment against probably your partner, against your father, against your mother. What we suggest is that it's likely better that you fight, and in fact, it is healthy to fight because it's unclear why any manifestations of conflict means that you're going to hurt each other physically. It's likely there's going to be a baseline level of respect insofar as this is a person that you cannot just detach yourself insofar as they as your child. But more than that, in the worst case, anger also fizzles out. And therefore, it's better that you allow these emotions to manifest themselves because it's easier for you to talk to each other after the emotion fizzles out, which often happens immediately after like it explodes. Sure, the POI.
If you are detaching yourself from these relationships because you are so unhappy, maybe you should just look inward and realize that you're not built for relationships, and that's also perfectly fine.
So if that's true, then a lot of people on your side do not meaningfully create relationships at all. It is unclear, therefore, why you get the benefit that comes from Prime Minister as to how people get into better relationships, etc., etc. But more than that, I think there are just independent reasons to why relationships itself are good. There's a support system that often allows you, to live a life better, etc., etc. It's pretty good to, come home with a good dinner after after a very very tireful day. At the end of the speech, clearly, if you want to talk about the over attachment, we clearly solve that by just showing how that does not exist. And in fact, even if it exists, the comparative also does not resolve that. But more than that, we suggest that it's better if relationships remain to the degree that it is within that healthy attachment and not detachment that becomes the first resort every time there is conflict. Conflict exists everywhere because of various experiences that people have. We think that having a healthy way to solve that just defeats government.
Okay, thank you very much for that speech. I'd now like to invite GovWhip to begin theirs.
Hi, can I check if I'm both audible and visible?
Yep.
Okay. POIs through chat, but you can also earn on cam. And then sure. That's also good. Love is a drug, and it's a drug that traps people in cycles of attachment and dependency. What detachment does is that it frees people from the rose-colored glasses and allow them to be happy being by themselves. Before I go on my issues, I just want to respond to this claim that came from side opposition that people in general will not value relationships and will not give baseline levels of respect to people like their parents, authority figures, and friends. Few responses to this. The first is, as they claimed, you will still have a baseline level of respect to authority figures precisely because they provide for you, they feed for you, and you also have some emotional connection to them. But the second thing is, as both teams agreed, people want to and value relationships, whether it be because you need emotional support, whether it be you want to talk to people about your day. And that's why the margin of the debate is not whether or not people will talk to each other, right? The margin of the debate is what Ben Sally says in his speech of you giving all of what you are and all of what you have to this person that you think will be your forever, will think that they will be your partner and ride or die. That is the one that we disagree about. We believe in a love that is slow. We believe in a love that may not be perfect. And we believe that sometimes love can be found in places, not in another man, but with yourself. The first issue that I want to tackle is whether or not we have better relationships in general. There are two aspects and I want to tackle into this. The first is we explain coming from Kara as to how idealizing your partner is terrible in a world where people didn't pivot to detachment. There are two ways. One, we explain that it creates resentment when this partner is not able to fulfill all your needs. Because the terrible thing about having someone be your emotional support, be someone you talk all your hobbies and interests to, be the person that you talk to about every single part of your day, is that they have their own lives as well, but also they might not always share the same interests and might not be there for you in the same emotional level of extent that you have. And that's why on the comparative, when this person is much more humanized and your expectations of romantic partners or even platonic partners is much more humanized, that's where you have healthier relationships because you don't feel resentment just because they can't do everything at once. Secondly, on the other side of the spectrum, you overlook the red flags and the icks in dating and meeting new people. And the bad thing about that is when you're overly committed to people, that's where you're more likely to get hurt. There's no response that we get from side opposition, so that's how it stands. But further, I want to note that at this point in time, this is where we flip a lot of their claim. This is where we say that resentment happens more. This is where we say that you're more likely to tolerate bad behavior because as side opposition themselves claim, you think that this person is the one. You always go into a relationship being fixated that a relationship is always good for you. Like all of the rhetoric is one that says you are complete when you meet a person that can be with you. And that's why you're willing to overlook the fact that they degrade you, that they don't respect you, that they're willing to put their needs above your own all of the time. But the second thing is, people leave relationships because they're not dependent on their partner. And this engages in our worst case, right? And why that is completely okay. But I want to actually engage on their best case. Why is it that you're more likely to have healthier conflict resolutions and you're able to communicate your concerns? This is where the flip happens. You're more likely to communicate your concerns and gripes when people are more secure that they're okay, even if the partner does not agree to what they want or does not want to create a middle ground. On opposition side, they keep it to themselves because they fear that they might lose the relationship. They fear that they will be met with disagreement. And that is bad because, again, when you keep it to yourself, you form the resentment, and that's where it comes from. But number two, you don't get the healthy communication and conflict because initially and in the later points of the relationship, that's what people focus on, keeping the peace, keeping everything under wraps until they can't hold it any further. And that's where you get all the explosive exchanges that lead to a lot of toxic relationships. That's where we flip a lot of the harms aside from opposition. Last thing that I want to flip, you have the capacity to leave and you have the capacity to tell your partner what it is that you want because you didn't give everything to them to begin with. When you don't give everything about yourself, all of your future plans, all of like your deepest, darkest secrets and insecurities, that is where you're more likely to be empowered because they don't have these things to hold up against you. Like you're not likely to call out your partner for being neglectful respectful if you already took a loan to a house together, if they know your deepest, darkest secrets and pictures that you don't want them to have. And that is why relationships are better in general. But last thing, and this is the extension that they miss, relationships are fairer. Like on either side of the house, detachment already benefits a certain group of people, men, people who earn more, people who are perceived to have given a lot in the relationship and therefore are entitled to moving on, to being able to detach when the relationship goes into awry. But for women and vulnerable individuals, they're expected to give a lot of emotional investment into the relationship, to be hung up onto these people, to put them on pedestals. The pivot to detachment has freed a lot of these people. And this is good. Insofar as not all relationships will work out, the question then is where more people are better off given this unfortunate reality. Before that,
So you wish-wash the definition of how detachment occurs in a relationship. Why would you resent people on our side when the comparative is just healthily attach yourself towards the relationships you form?
So I want to call you out. That is not healthy attachment. Giving 100% to someone, especially when you're not likely to be the person that you end up with, especially when it is your perception that they're the perfect person, which is not true, by the way, because people are flawed beings with their own demons as well. And that's perfectly okay. The last issue then is, are individuals better? And I want to point out, they don't make any response to this. So I will just explain why this is important. The most important relationship you will have is with yourself. People come and go, and the thing is, we don't have a say in when they leave. And that's why being able to detach in any point of the relationship is key, because you don't know at which point your relationship will end. We explained 3 things that why it's good when you don't attach your self-worth to a relationship. 1, you don't rush into the next one. And that's where more people are self-reflective. Number 2, people don't go into the relationship when they're not ready. But lastly, the most important part is that most of the partners that you'll end up with will not be the one. And that's why more and more people, for example, don't meet the love of their life in the first, second, and third. It's oftentimes after these things, because you will just meet different people at different points of your life. And the worst thing that you can do to yourself is one where you attach to a certain person, stay too long, and that's where you actually deprive yourself of happiness. But even then, if not now, it might be later. If not then, it's better. And either way, side government believes you'll be okay. For all those things and more, propose.
Thank you very much for that speech. And I'd like to invite Upwhip to do the same.
Hello?
Yeah, you're audible.
Just arranging my notes. Starting. The trick in Gov is to say that pivot makes people more rational. But I want you to parse very carefully through the mechanisms and like what the DLO gives in response. Because the DLO responds to the rationality thing by saying that there are independent reasons why people will want to be irrational. I want you to vibe check the idea from government about how you will sacrifice, you take out a loan, match your degree program with your crush, etc., etc. There are a lot of reasons why people wouldn't do that. Things, for example, like the fact that you have your own dreams and ambitions, but secondly, the fact that you care about financial security. Therefore, you're unlikely to make these rash financial decisions in government side, even if you really fall in love with another individual. But thirdly, even if the media does glamorize a lot of these things, the way in which people receive some of these fictionalized interpretations of relationship is simply that it is fiction. It can happen in the media, but it most often than not cannot happen in real life. People are able to scale down their expectations of what these things are. Therefore, I think what government does broadly in this debate is a very cheaty way of overblowing the actual contributions of the pivot, while explaining why the things that they say are directly attributable to the operation itself. The first thing that I'm going to talk about is the idea on, does detachment equate to rationality? And I think what government does is to explain that people become rational through both internal and external mechanisms. And what I want to focus first on is on the internal mechanism of people enabling enabling people to introspect better when you have the pivot. I think in a POI I launched the DPM, I said that people will fall in love regardless because affection and attraction is something that you cannot control as an individual. I.e., when you see someone attractive, you feel this rush of emotions, and you suddenly feel in love, you suddenly want to be with that person, etc., etc. And when you are in love, I think in opposition in government side, you're still likely to make these irrational decisions because these chemical reactions are making you do things that are out of your control. So therefore, the internal mechanism of government fails because even if you do detach yourself, you don't give in 100%, you still have your own thoughts to contend you. You're still left to your own delusions about what that relationship could have been, which is why there is no internal mechanism existing at all in government. But secondly, let's talk about the external mechanisms from a government bench. They say that you will cross-reference with your friends and peers on their side of the house. First question, are your friends and peers reliable as means of external cross-referencing? What Ben suggests in the first part of his speech is that often these kinds of spaces are insufficient because often your friends are like-minded individuals and therefore their opinions likely affirm what you already think and what you already experience. So they're on an unreliable cross-referencing point because insofar as they only affirm what you already think. But secondly, this is damning to their case if they agree that cross-referencing exists, because if it exists, then on our side as well, because that hedges against a lot of the harms that they throw upon our side of people just becoming irrational. Yes, even if you might be internally irrational still in opposition because the love emotions make you feel heady and like delusional, you still have your friends to moderate your affection and attraction so that you do make sensible decisions as well. So if you buy the idea of cross-referencing in government, you must also buy the idea that cross-referencing also exists in opposition, which defeats a lot of their harms from government bench. Go POI.
Yeah, so maybe your friends will cross-reference you, but the practice of you not being complete until you're in a relationship, you having to give all in a relationship, are things that your friends will peddle, and we explain why that is also bad.
Yeah, and that's why your kind of cross-referencing makes it bad, right? Because if you say that your friends regurgitate the same amounts of idealistic notions of love, then that is likely the kinds of advice that your friends will give you as well. But secondly, you still rely on the assumption that people buy easily into these idealistic notions about love, when in fact Ben and Leah already give you a lot of reasons to mitigate the extent to which these idealistic notions play out in real life and affect people's psyche. At best, like I don't know, like you give out a lot of big harms, but don't explain first the prerequisite reason why these harms are likely to be strong. What is the conclusion, therefore? I think what government does is to say that rationality is a prerequisite for good decision-making, insofar as I explained, that internally and externally, their preconditions for rationality are destroyed, means that rationality is probably not a value that you can get as well. What is the comparative then, in terms of the worst case? Yeah, on our side of the house, you may fall, and this is me dealing with the worst case, right? You may fall headlong into a relationship at first, probably, but why is this still good as a worst case? First, you learn about the other side, because once you enter a relationship and suddenly feel like my boyfriend might not be the Prince Charming that Cinderella said, that's when you start to question these idealistic notions of love. But secondly, you start to question whether these idealistic notions are true because you actively test yourself against the actual relationship that you have. Fine, initially, you might have idealistic notions, but the process in which relationships play out on our side, because you actively communicate and actively interact with each other, means that over time, those idealistic notions are chipped and ruined, and therefore at the end of the day, you finally have a more realistic idea of what the relationships should be. So this is me biting the worst case of Gov, right? That even if idealistic notions do affect the way that you choose relationships, the inherent process of how a relationship works exclusively in opposition, which is mutual communication, always seeking the other out and communicating your problems, means that these idealistic notions therefore not become as strong anymore because you compare it to what you actually experience in real life. The next thing I'm going to talk about is attachment too bad? And I want to make you very question heavily the case from government, because at best what they do is to say that independence is good and being on your own is good, but nowhere in the speech did they explain why you being independent is enough. The same reasons they say that families and friends can be volatile are also the same reasons why the self is volatile as well. So you don't control your time because there are a lot of forces that are out of your control. And in those instances, what are their safety nets? Fine, your family might be like unresponsive, but the fact of the matter on our side is that you have a lot of options to rely on. Your family might be unresponsive, but you still have your friends, your aunts, your uncles, the stranger that you met online, etc., etc. And this will allow you to cope. On their side of the house, in the worst case, if the self fails, it makes it hard for the individuals to reach out to each other. Why is it likely comparative? Firstly, because they place a premium on independence, because they spread the message that you should not give your 100% to other people people as well, because less they like trick you. But secondly, it is self-enforcing in government, right? If you aren't used to interacting with others other than yourself, you're likely to always self-isolate and do things on your own and never seek out others as well, which is why this is like a comparative. In the worst cases of individuals where A, in government, the individual fails in like bringing himself up, and in opposition where some of your peers might be unresponsive and might not be willing to help you, the exclusive benefit and the comparative in opposition is optionality. Your family might fail, but your friends might surely be there as well, because not all the time all of your peers are unavailable at a particular point in time, right? So even in the worst case of you attaching yourself to other people, we explain that it's a good safety net in times of individual volatility and individual failure. Very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much. Let's now begin the reply speeches, starting with Op Reply.
Would like to confirm if I'm audible.
Yep, you're audible.
Team government, much like the relationships that exist on their world, is steering a sinking ship, is staying in a bad relationship with their case, even if there are so many red flags already. The first call out that I'd like to make against side government is that they heavily conflate the idea that detachment is rationality. Judges, you cannot weigh these things as likely to be the same, especially when Leah already beautifully puts that the origin of detachment is one that is likely coming from fear. And this comes as early as Ben as well. When I tell you, for example, that it is the fear that you might be wrong, it is the fear that you might be vulnerable. But on Leah, it's the fear of making meaningful connections, because that is the time where you become vulnerable, where you expose your faults, where you open yourself to the idea of getting hurt. That means that if they want to champion rationality on side government, that is not something that you get meaningfully, precisely because the reason why you check yourself out of a relationship, why you never give the needed investment in the relationship that you have, is specifically because you're afraid that it's already to fail. We say that on their side, it is where relationships are set up for failure, where you never love, where you never learn, where you can never depend on anyone. We say that the quality of relationships that exist on side government is much worse. But even if you don't believe that, we say that this is just a simple vibe check, right? If you detach yourself emotionally from a relationship, why would you still attach yourself rationally and look at if this relationship is mentally good for you or not? You have to take detachment by its fullest extent, right? It is completely checking yourself out emotionally, mentally, physically, rationally over the relationships that you build. It is when you numb yourself of the indicators of a relationship being good. It is when you numb yourself of these instances being bad. But next call out I'd like to make is they only talk about romantic relationships. And note, the kinds of relationships that they talk about in debate is in the creation of relationship. Opposition debates, the bigger debate of how you maintain the lifelong relationships that you have. Because as early as Ben, we told you that it's not just about boyfriends and husbands. It's about parents. It's about siblings. It's about maintaining your relationships with your friends. And this is important because you cannot have an ex-dad. You cannot have an ex-brother. These are things that you cannot replace and look for someone else in your life. So the mechanism from Chelsea doesn't work in this debate. We gave you analysis on how you have to maintain meaningful relationships with them and why the lack of detachment is the tipping point for that existing, precisely because that is how you create meaningful relationships. So on their world, if they want to co-opt it, it is when they only have compliant relationships with their dad. But what we debate is we have meaningful relationships with them where we allow to share our vulnerabilities and to actually learn from these individuals who are supposed to guide us throughout their lives. So we debate the bigger debate. That means we already win by a huge margin. The issue that I want to arbitrate then is, where do you get better relationships in this debate? Because not that this is something that both sides want to talk about, and this is an issue that both sides are trying to mechanize towards. The main gov push is that attachment allows you to be more discerning of your relationship. That means you'll be less hurt, coming from Kara, but also from Chelsea, it means that you know when it's time to leave a toxic relationship. The first is, I already responded to this, right? We told you what's so wrong with getting hurt, precisely because when you don't know yourself, it is through the process of getting hurt. It is through fights that you know what you actually truly need, precisely because you don't have a full understanding of what you have. But the next question, and this is more of a technical call out, is how are the relationships likely to look like on their world? What does a discerning individual look like? And why is that relationship likely to be much, much more meaningful sustainable to them. But more importantly, I just want to vibe check then Chelsea's argument. How do you know if it's time to leave if you detach yourself from the relationships that you have? Compare this with the two counter pushes that come from opposition. One, the disinvolvement ruins the quality of your existing relationship. So even if you agree that they can live on their world and they are better at leaving, we say that what is the value of the ability to leave if you never had a relationship with them in the first place? Precisely because you don't know who they are. They don't know who you are. They don't know your vulnerabilities. They don't know your experience. Why is the quality of relationship on their world likely to be one that is better and likely to be one that is sustainable? But the second counter push is the ability to leave, on how when you're in tune with your emotions, that's when you know that you get hurt. So UP wins by a huge margin, precisely because we're the only team that brings solvency on how we actually get to maintain and improve all the relationships in our personal lives. Very, very proud to oppose.
Thank you very much for that reply. I'd now like to invite Gov to do the same.
3, 2, 1, go. It is true that detachment is based off of fear. It is the fear that you might give yourself to this person with no reciprocation despite your mutual obligation to one another. And so opposition concedes to our frame, to no response, where we tell you that the pivot to detachment was created by people that were most vulnerable in relationships, and the fear that built up because of years of men and breadwinners being allowed to detach. And that's why the pivot is important, because it democratizes detachment and makes relationships more fair. The first thing I want to note in this reply is that government was extremely charitable in this debate, because we argue on the simple definition given by Ben at first, that detachment simply means not giving 100% of yourself to your partner. And what we logically extract from this, by the way, we didn't conflate it, we explained with multiple layers of analysis that if you are not completely financially and emotionally reliant on your partner, you're more likely to take a step back and evaluate, is this relationship happening in a way that's okay for me? Do I want this relationship at all? Am I more okay being by myself than with people that do not care about me and neglect my needs and my interests? But opposition is only able to debate on the most convenient frame for them. They say you won't talk to your partner at all, despite us saying that you will still talk to your partner because you still want that emotional crutch. They say you will sever all of your good relationships. You will self-isolate all the time and to everyone. So on point of engagement, they already have to lose because they never engage with their worst case. What if these people are not actually right for you? The second thing I want to note is that they say that there will be more relationships on their side, but they never engage on the question that we asked. Are relationships or more relationships inherently good? There are people that simply are not ready to be in relationships, but because of the fact that media sensationalizes the idea of a romantic partner so much that they go into relationships despite not being ready for them, they make people attached, and this attachment is what leads to resentment, and it is what leads to hurt. It's okay on our side if people don't opt into relationships, because when we ask the POI and ask them, if you are detaching so much from your relationships, if you cannot bring it into yourself to care about these people that you have an obligation to, then maybe you shouldn't be in relationships at all. What Leah says is, well, relationships are good because there is a support system. Yeah, you're making these people a support system for you and your problems while you yourself are detaching. We think everyone else should have that right. But the thing I want to note is that they say that, oh, well, it's also about your brothers, your sisters, your mothers and fathers and friends. You're likely to still maintain these relationships because you're reliant on these people. Financially, your parents still pay for your education. They still pay for your housing. You don't have ex-brothers, and you them is that you're still likely to maintain these relationships in the first place. The margin of difference in the debate is the relationships that you can opt in and out of, and that is where detachment is likely to happen. The last thing I want to note is on weighing. So on opposition, by their context that they've set up at Ben, you give your 100% of yourself to everyone, all of your romantic relationships throughout your life. What we explain is that's bad. By the way, they can't just say that, oh, people are able to scale down their expectations, because they say it themselves that you're going to give 100% of yourself to someone. What we explain is that you shouldn't be doing this, because not everyone that you're in a relationship with, or not everyone that you're going to meet throughout your life is your ride or die. You're not going to be forever with all of your exes. And what we explain is that you shouldn't be expected to give 100% of yourself to someone that maybe you're not compatible with maybe it's neglectful towards you and what you actually want or desire. And therefore it's okay if people detach, because that is where they're able to set emotional boundaries. That is where they're able to step back and realize what they actually want and what they actually are not okay with. Those kinds of things are important in relationships, not just for the relationship that you have now, but for future relationships that you will create in the future. For all those reasons, propose things.
Thank you very much for that wonderful debate. You may now virtually cross the house, and I'd like to invite my panelists to head into the deliberation room.